Hello and welcome to another episode of the SumerSports podcast. In tradition with every other Wednesday that I've done this show, I let the intro music loop again, but I caught it and we're back on track. Thanks for being here today. Very excited to be back with another great guest, continuing in our series on the SumerSports show of interviewing smart people around the analytics and numbers and football and world. And we have a really great guest today. Before I pull him in here, I want to say, make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube channel. Make sure you're subscribed or following on the Twitter, but most importantly, go to the website. I don't know if you saw, but if you haven't been to SumerSports.com recently, we gave it a little bit of a facelift, a sign of good things to come. Got some interesting stats up there, all of our articles and everything up on the zone. So SumerSports.com, you can sign up. There's going to be a newsletter that'll go out Mondays and Fridays during the week. In season as well. Make sure you get all that good content. We've been working on a lot of fun stuff and are very excited to share it with all of you as the NFL season ramps up. And as the NFL season ramps up, we will talk a little bit about NFL numbers today, but more big picture, talking about specifically using numbers to reduce uncertainty and understand outcomes a little bit better. We have on today Rufus Peabody, pro sports bettor, co-founder at Unabated Sports, the second half of Massey-Peabody Analytics. We talked to Cade Massey earlier this offseason, and now we've got the other half here with Rufus. He hosts a podcast called Bet the Process that I'm sure many of you listen to. Rufus, thanks for being here today.
Hey, thanks for having me, Parker.
Really excited to get you on. Obviously, had that conversation with Cade, and I'm an economist in training, and so I got to talk to him about Richard Thaler and all of the academic work and get kind of deep in there and scratch the surface a little bit about the Massey-Peabody rankings for the NFL and some of those things, and so wanted to have you on to flesh out the other half of the operation, if you will. But before we get into that, Rufus, tell us a little bit about your background, about how you got into the world of gambling, of using numbers to understand sports and make informed decisions and predictions.
Well, I think I got into this world by accident. I think when I got back into it, I think that was kind of the only way to get into this world. I've always been into the number side of sports growing up, so I think it kind of is a natural fit for me. And I just happened to luck into an internship with odds makers in Las Vegas in the summer of 2007, just based on an article I read on ESPN.com. And I called this company and talked my way into an internship and did my senior thesis on psychological inefficiencies in the sports betting, or in the baseball betting market, I should say. Back at Yale under Cade Massey, he advised it, and then moved to Vegas, worked for odds makers, and started building my own models, mostly attacking smaller markets at the beginning, derivatives and props, and then the baseball betting model, which I had sort of built as an extension of the senior thesis, and got lucky to meet people that were betting for a living and had a bankroll and were willing to take a chance on me in 2009. And it's been a wild ride since then. But Cade and I started the Massey-Peabody ratings back in 2010. And so it's hard to believe it's been that many years, but here we are.
Yeah, that's that is crazy. 2009, right? Seems to me, I'm like, oh, that's like 4 or 5 years ago. But then you look and see it's 2023, and that's 15 years in the industry for you. That's pretty crazy. Yeah. So at what point did, and I want to talk about this a little more in depth too, about like the unabated stuff and how that kind of all came to pass. But I'm interested kind of in the moment, the light bulb moment of you working for the books. And of course, obviously there's some, put fences around things you want to put fences around. I'll ask and let you say, I don't really want to talk about that. That's all right. What was your kind of light bulb moment of like, hey, I think if I flip to the other side, I could be doing much better than I'm doing here?
That's a good question. And I still kind of remember this moment where it was the fall of 2008 and I was grinding away. I'd started with a bankroll of $10,000, which was money that I'd had from working summer jobs. And my grandfather had started, I think had taken out a life insurance policy in my name when I was little. And so I was like, cashed that out for a little bit. And so really responsible decision, right? But no, my thought was, okay, like you need to have a bankroll to make some money, but I didn't have much of one. So I was betting anywhere from like $50 to $300 per bet. But I remember, and I was playing some blackjack on the side, card counting, but spreading, I don't know, $5 or $10 a hand to like $50 a hand. So not very much. I'm not going to expect to make more than like $20 an hour doing that. I don't think. Somebody can check my math on that, but I was tracking everything religiously in a spreadsheet. And I remember, I think it was in October or November of that year, I was like, okay, I've made like, in a few months, I've made like $7,000 or $8,000. It's like, you know what? If I lost my job, I think I could scrape by doing this for a living. And so that was kind of, and that was, I think that was a big mental hurdle, right? Knowing that because I think knowing that I could sort of make it in this world, in an industry that's designed to take your money. So
Yeah. Yeah, and that's certainly hard, and certainly that's something you're navigating as well. As how do you continue to be profitable with limits, and how players get limited, and kind of how to navigate the world. I think I'm fascinated by that. That's probably outside of the scope of this podcast. So I might hit you up with questions about that later. But focusing specifically kind of on using these models, you start building up and saying, let me put some numbers to paper to start kind of fighting against some of these biases that people have when they're approaching these markets, when they're approaching how to understand what happened in the past and what's going to happen in the future. Do you sense any kind of commonality, common themes across your models for different sports? Because I mean, how many sports have you profitably created a model and successfully been in the money on betting
in my life?
Yeah, ever.
Let's see. Baseball, golf, NFL, college football. There was a point where we did MMA. And then I'm doing college basketball now, but that's not that was not in my own creation. I'm adding to it. So I'd say 5 maybe. But the commonalities, and then props and derivatives and other things like that. But I would say the commonalities very much revolve around process and around trying to differentiate skill from luck, what's predictive from what isn't. And I think the other thing really, and to sort of get into that, I mean, I think creativity, being able to be creative and curious, like asking questions of the data I think my biggest strength is just having these ideas and questions to ask of the data and being able to structure them in a way where I can actually get an answer that is usable and sort of productionizable.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you're doing that and you're putting, pen to paper, because I think there's a couple types of people. Some that say, I'm going to create this number, I'm going to go by this number. Some people who say, hey, I don't like analytics, I don't like the numbers at all. I'm going to look at situation. How do you kind of weigh those two approaches, which both have some validity in when you write down a model there? Because isn't there kind of like almost a meta bias if you write down a model, if you trust it too much or you don't trust it enough, that kind of might skew your thinking and your thought process as well?
That's a good point. And I think that first off, in regards to the sort of situational versus a model thing, I mean, I like to model situational stuff if I can. I do not have a ton of trust in my own instincts, in my own intuition, at least in terms of being able to say, oh, there's people that can watch film and stuff like that and just immediately be able to sort of come to some conclusion or have some insight. And I wouldn't be able to trust that insight if I had it, just given the fact that that I can't really quantify it. And so that's certainly one thing. But I mean, I do think being able to, I mean, you build a model and then you don't just blindly bet based on that or anything like that. You look and see how much power that model has relative to the market. And, and so I regress to the market after. I don't use any market numbers in building my model. And one reason for that is because then you don't, it gives the model more predictive power in an absolute sense, but it also doesn't add any alpha to the model just because if you're using the market, you're not going to beat the market that way. So I like seeing where I'm different from the market. And then I run a regression with the market number to, in essence, figure out how much I should regress my model to the market. Too many M words. And I think what's tough though is I might, let's say in college football, I determine that ideally I weight the market 70%, the closing line 70%, and my number 30%, which that's a good spot to be in. But that doesn't mean that every game is going to be the same. right? I mean, there might be things in my model that that the market is, or certain teams where I've been high on them all season relative to the market. And maybe if that's the case, I'm missing something. And so I shouldn't weight my number as much or on that. And so, I mean, I think there's the building the model part, and then there's the sort of looking at where, I don't even know how to describe it, but basically analyzing where your number is and how and its differences from the market, and how sort of the autocorrelation with those differences from the market in previous games, and seeing if that actually has any impact and if that should affect what your true number is going to be going forward.
Yeah, I think Kate said it really, really nicely on the podcast earlier this summer, where I kind of asked that question that you segued into really, really nicely about, hey, you regress to the market. How do you square that with having a predictive model, and how does that work? And he kind of just said, it's awesome that we've created something that we could have any signal at all. Like the market plus us is even any percent better at all. That's a vote of confidence in the model. And I mean, I do it all the time. Like I do college football numbers and just put them out there. And it's like the MAC. I get murdered in the MAC, and I know it, and it's fine. Something I'm not capturing, can work on it, whatever. But also, I'm not going to pretend like I'm, hey, I need to trust this number on the MAC. I can say, nope, I think that's a little weird, and I'm not going to. I'm going to let the market information kind of drive me a little bit more in the MAC than elsewhere.
That's an example of that is something we noticed in terms of our recruiting stuff for military academies in the past. It doesn't have really the same impact for those. I mean, those schools are not getting great recruits, but they're not playing the same game exactly. And so if if you can find those little things where those exceptions to the rule, I think that's a source of alpha, or at least a source of like not making bad bets.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm laughing because I definitely have an interaction term that is talent times is recruited, or is service academy, 1 or 0 there to account for that. But obviously, yeah, it's hard to do. But those are small kind of, not necessarily edges, but small things to take into the context that can help us kind of pull away. What do I expect about going forward? What do I expect about the relationship of this team to their stats on a week-to-week basis? I think something like as trivial, almost as trivial as garbage time, which I think I was reading an interview you did today, and you talked about how that's a big thing people can kind of filter out, is say, let's account for some of this garbage time. That's going to help us understand a little bit better what's going to happen next, potentially against another team, rather than, hey, what happened when these guys were already beat and potentially gave up? Because you guys in the NFL model are filtering out garbage time or accounting for big leads and all of that.
We are, and we're doing it in a way that's sort of we build a function, in essence, a weighting function that is a function of the leverage of a situation. And so we're not someone who's watching the game and can say, oh, this is when this team pulled their starters, or this is when Alabama just decided to run the ball up the middle every play with their third stringers, right? We're not doing that, but we have some function overall that basically is optimized for out of sample performance, to, in essence, de-weight when the game is out of reach late. And I kind of like that we do it in that we don't have some sort of threshold that says, okay, 4 touchdown game in the fourth quarter, we're not counting that. We have something that's, I just don't like arbitrary endpoints in general. But we are able to do that. But again, if you're watching the games and can identify, okay, this is the point where essentially the effort was different or something, you'd probably do better.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think that's more of an advantage in the NFL, and why something like garbage time in the NFL isn't as big a deal. One, because the competition is a little stiffer across the board. The kind of, hey, this is a blowout isn't exactly as cut and dry as college football, where, Ohio State's just going to beat the ever-loving heck out of somebody, and it really doesn't matter that they scored 3 more touchdowns with their third string 5-star backup, in there or not. But it is, that point about kind of arbitrary endpoints is always interesting to me, because it's like 28 points in the fourth quarter. I use Bill Conley's definition for garbage time because it kind of correlates pretty well to win probability, and it's easy enough to describe. But it is like, okay, what if it was 27 points in the fourth quarter? Or what if it was 27 points in the beginning of the third quarter? And if they come back, do I turn the garbage time off or back on? I think there's a lot there that you've got to think about if you're going to implement that filter.
Yeah, and the other thing is thinking about the incentives for teams too. So the difficulty of the situation in terms of, I think this is more of a situation in the NFL than it is college football. where, Ohio, or let's say Alabama's playing McNeese State. I mean, you could say the game is a blowout from the beginning, right? I mean, they're not giving full effort the entire game, right? It's not like McNeese State is gonna, it's not like,
Right.
and it's not like when Alabama's up big, they're gonna just suddenly say, okay, let's go into a cover two and just give up a lot of underneath routes. I mean, they're seeing how these third stringers can perform, but
Right.
but like in the NFL, a team, if you're down 21 points and early in the fourth quarter, the defense you're going to be facing is oftentimes going to be different, and it's going to allow you to get 5 or 6 yard plays a little more easily. But the trade-off is it's trying to prevent those big plays. So, but again, that's not always the case either, right? I mean, certain teams are maybe not going to do that. They're going to say, we're going to continue playing our game. And so I think this is where you get into, I mean, if you have like the Massey-Peabody system is very general, and it's like there are these rules, but I think a source of alpha, if you look at it, is sort of finding exceptions to these rules.
Yeah. Tell me, that's a great segue. Tell me a little bit about it in kind of your words. So the Massey-Peabody ratings, if you guys listened to the podcast earlier, Cade told us a little bit about the story about the Wall Street Journal reaching out and saying, how do I make this? And Cade saying, hey, what if we make this? And then reaching out, and you guys have kind of built it up from there. So, understanding kind of where it came from, I'll ask, where did it come from in terms of how did you decide what we're going to quantify on the field? What do we think is important? And what's its kind of, what's the elevator pitch for the Massey-Peabody ratings?
Well, we started by saying we're only going to use what has happened on the field to generate predictions. So the first 2 seasons we did it with no priors at all. Going into the season, everybody's a 0, which is not the way to optimize this. It's not the way to optimize predictively, but if you're, let's say, the college football playoff selection committee, it's probably what you should do to some extent if you want to only reward teams based on how well they actually played. So our goal all along was to use simple metrics that are available, simple metrics, and contextualize them very well, and to kind of be able to use this in a way. And this is definitely what Cade adds to it, but in a way to be able to sort of learn stuff from it, right? Learn where markets are inefficient or people overreact to things. And I mean, even if it wasn't markets being inefficient, but where narratives can run awry, things like that. And so I think that's always been our strength, being able to not overreact to recency, to contextualize for situation, for opponent, and properly sort of regress to the mean. And we started using priors back in 2012 for the NFL, and that's obviously a huge thing. And now I think we're huge advocates for priors. And the fact is, like for college football, even after a full season, we're still regressing a large amount to our priors. And I think it sounds completely weird, but you have 2 teams that both played to the same ability level, same performance numbers on the field. I want the team with the higher recruits, higher rated recruits, I should say, than the team with sort of less talent. I mean, I expect they will do better moving forward. So,
yeah, absolutely. And that's always so hard because, ESPN will get dunked on for having Texas in the top 10 in their FPI and they're 8-4. And you're like, well, you understand how they got there. Like, it's a small sample size. It's not like with a baseball pitcher where I can say, all right, you're this draft pick. You did this in the minors. Let me adjust that for the era and for the parks. And then I'm going to get a ton of reps and be able to kind of do, a very easy, smooth Bayesian updating and figure out what direction you're going to go. Every week in football, and the same in the NFL, there's so much variance week to week. And because it's such a small sample size, if you don't have priors, you're going to start picking, the Minnesota Vikings to win the Super Bowl in 2022, even though they have a negative point differential, right?
Yeah, they're really. I mean, you have such small sample sizes in football, and you have certain plays that can really swing a game in a big way. I mean, what was it? I was listening to a podcast last week, and they were talking about how the it was, what was it? The Devontae Smith catch against the Niners that wasn't a catch, right? And that was the second largest EPA play in the postseason or something like that. And it's like,
yeah.
It actually shouldn't have counted. But then if you think about that, you could say, well, you know what? He probably should have caught the ball too. So even if it was a drop, you could say, okay, like maybe, you shouldn't, I guess in essence, the outcome of each play, there's still a lot of randomness in that. So, and I think
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
one,
absolutely.
and you didn't ask this, but that's one thing we also do in on a play level is try to figure out the predictive value of the play. So if you have a 90-yard screen pass that goes for a touchdown when the receiver breaks one tackle and runs the last 70 yards untouched, I mean, does that really deserve to be a 90-yard play predictively? I mean, if you're at the 50, if the team is at the 50-yard line, it would have been a 50-yard touchdown, right? So of course, explosive plays matter and stuff like that. But at the same time, there's some diminishing marginal returns predictively to each additional yard on these sort of big plays.
Yeah, absolutely, and it is a lot of the factor is, a guy was in this position. Have a follow up on that. Do want to we're getting close to halfway mark here. I want to one make sure just to shout out, if you're watching, I see some numbers in here, and you've got a comment for Rufus about gambling, about numbers and sports, anything you want, please toss it in the comments, and we'll absolutely get to them. Appreciate you guys watching, and I'm having fun so far. Hopefully you guys are enjoying watching this, but please throw some questions in here. We'll be happy to get to them. Excuse me. Yeah, and I think things like penalties, right? A lot of your, I read your read through your senior thesis this week, kind of in preparation for this, and kind of I did skimmed. I'm just out of academia, but I know enough to do. Let's read the intro and the conclusion, and then if I need to scan anything else, I can. But so, and just talking about, hey, removing noise. One of those big areas is penalties. So you talked about right there a guy getting a underthrown ball that like maybe he should have caught, but he didn't catch, and it changed the entire course of the game because it was called a catch. Penalties, I feel like, are a very similar thing there, where that holding brought back that running play, but should we give a team credit for if that that guy shouldn't have held, and maybe it would have been a tackle, and you have to downweight those penalty plays as well. Like in an ideal world, you'd almost get a counterfactual where you could say, hey, this was an uncalled holding, or this was a holding that wasn't supposed to be there, and you could kind of adjust. But there's noise in just whether the penalty was called or not and how it affected the play.
Oh, for sure. And I think that's a challenge with doing things sort of in aggregate without having detailed information on, if that, like the kind of thing that like Pro Football Focus or Stats Bomb or any of those sites that are, or I'm sure you guys,
SumerSports.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like I'm sure what you guys actually have and are able to say, okay, this holding call or this hold actually caused the 30-yard gain here. Without that holding call, it's a 2-yard loss. So, I mean, if you said, okay, do we want to eliminate all, do we want to use the results of plays where there's holding, or do we want to use the results of the plays where there's some other penalty? You can come up with something in aggregate saying, okay, yes, we should, or we should weight them X percent. But I mean, you can be very wrong on an individual play there, but because you don't know exactly the impact it had.
Yeah. And the hope would be that your model is in such a place that one explosive play doesn't completely throw things up. But on the average, you want to make sure you're accounting for, hey, this should come out on the wash, that these are not going to be consistent indicators of future performance.
Right. And I mean, what's interesting, if you look at penalties in general, I mean, there's very little correlation to team strength overall. And actually, I don't know if this actually was true the last few years, but I remember there was a point where when I looked at it, penalties by defensive secondaries tended to be predictive of a better team. I mean, so it's almost like the Georgetown, the Hoyas of the 80s, where their strategy was basically in college basketball, the strategy was to basically foul every time down. And so if you do that, eventually the ref's not going to call a foul every time, because it's going to look like, there's not going to be like 25 fouls on one team and like 6 on the other, so the definition kind of changes if you do it every time.
Yep. And it's almost like you think about Tennessee under Josh Heupel and that kind of, absurd offense where they're just chucking it downfield and hoping for pass interference on a lot of these plays. They wouldn't be able to do that if they couldn't have a credible threat of, we're going to throw a touchdown if you don't commit a pass interference here. And so there is some signal and kind of how that might go forward, even if not at the play level, but on the aggregate level of, this is the kind of offense that you're running. So yeah, certainly interesting to do that. I have a question that's similarly related. It might take us a little bit of a different direction, but so we're talking about a lot of the game here in trying to understand sport outcomes and make good predictions going forward using data is separating signal from noise as kind of coming up with a good process and not necessarily entirely trusting results. Specifically with predictions and even into, gambling a little bit, how do you weigh the distinction between good process and good results? Is it possible that you have a good process if you have bad results? How much stock do you put in, hey, here's my record against the spread versus, hey, here's my model and I know that these things are important for a game? And even if right now my numbers aren't doing great this season, I can tinker and kind of improve, but I still think the process is good.
Good process on the betting side, and results on the betting side. We're in the results business. I mean, if I don't have good results, I don't make money. But at the same time, you're going to have periods where you definitely have bad results. And I think for me, it's easier just because I've been doing this for so long that I kind of have a lot of trust. But at the same time, your edges can dry up or decrease. And so I think you need to, in essence, look at there is a process aside from just using the results to sort of evaluate how you're doing. And I mean, part of that's, am I getting the same sort of closing line value? Is the market moving towards my number in the ways that it had before? If you're betting and you never really if you're betting into closing lines and that's probably not going to be something you can use as much, but basically looking at how things had changed. And if you're betting a new sport, I think that's always tougher. I mean, we started betting college basketball last year for the first time, and we were in like a $300,000 hole after 5 weeks. And we were getting, I think our closing line value was about negative 0.5%. That's no vig. So the line was moving towards us a little bit, but not enough for us to overcome the vig. So in essence, I figured, we'd back tested this. I had a lot of faith in it. The results had been bad. It's not like we were there were occasions we were on the wrong side of close games, but it felt like there were some games we were just getting spanked in too. So, but I figured, okay, is it worst case scenario here? I think we're going to lose 0.5% basically going forward. And so we were fine continuing betting, and we ended up having a major turnaround and returned over 5% ROI on the season per bet. So, and that was the situation where I kind of felt really proud of us for sort of staying the course and not overreacting to results, and just thinking of it just as sort of an asymmetric bet in a way. Like, sure, maybe there was some leakage in the model. It isn't actually winning. We're not going to win, but if that's the case, we're getting enough line movement that we're not just throwing darts. And so I wouldn't expect to lose that much. Whereas
right,
if it was in line with our historicals, there's a lot more to gain.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I want to talk a little bit about Unabated and what you guys have going on there, because it's super cool. And I use the having the lines and everything right up there is just fascinating. And then we'll get to we got some questions in the comments. Make sure you toss some more in there if you've got them. But yeah, tell me about where did Unabated come from? Where did it start from? And how you guys have kind of built this up as a business and a tool for people who are interested in, being smart about their betting and kind of comparing and understanding the bigger picture of it all.
Well, first off, I'm the worst at giving an elevator pitch for Unabated. So, yeah, like I need Jack to just give me something to read. But where it started, it actually started initially out of Jack and I, Captain Jack, CapJack 2000 on Twitter, for people that are, I don't know how much you all follow the sports betting world, but he's kind of a tireless advocate for bettors and in essence for like consumer protection in the betting space. And so he and I had this idea to start a nonprofit that would be the voice of bettors, to sort of help in terms of drafting legislation and stuff, because the one constituency not represented is bettors. Basically, you hear all the operators talking about what bettors want, and regulators, and they're not talking to bettors. Bettors don't have a seat at the table. So the pandemic then hit, and we realized like we were not going to be able to actually raise money, and also neither of us really have the business sense to be able to like we're not we have our businesses as bettors, but we're not business people in that sense. And so it looked like it was a little too much for us to bite off. But, I then talked to, it kind of came out of that. Like we still wanted to do something. And I had some other friends that in the industry, Matt Snyder, who is a developer, and he we had this vision of still wanting to help bettors, and he has the programming skills, and Dan Fabrizio, who had the business acumen, he had run Sports Insights, and so we wanted to help bettors and do that through, at least what I was passionate about was sort of building tools that would help people quantify their own opinions and essentially make their process better. Like, we didn't want to give people the answers, but we wanted to give them the tools to find the answers themselves and to improve their execution and be part of their process. And so an example, like we have an odds screen that doesn't just tell you what the odds are. It kind of gives you, it kind of, I guess, gives insight into to be able to compare lines across different markets, derivatives, that kind of thing, to be able to say, okay, if I want to bet the Green Bay Packers in this game, what is the best line, the best market to bet into? And so I think there's a lot of leakage in people not necessarily taking the best price available. And sometimes it's not as simple as saying, do I bet -4 or -3.5? That's pretty obvious. But do I bet -3.5 or this full game money line? Do I bet -3.5 or this alternate -1.5 laying, -140? I don't know. And so there's things like that. But but the thing I'm most passionate about is the NFL simulator and the prop simulator, which basically allows people to use their own projections or projections we provide. And we have customizable settings. For example, the NFL season simulator, you can ratchet up the uncertainty for a team. Like, let's say the Browns, you think there's a lot of uncertainty in how good their offense could be based on who Deshaun Watson is. Is he the quarterback he was with the Texans, or is he the quarterback he was last year with the Browns? Right. Because obviously different teams have a lot more uncertainty in their outcomes than others. And then we also are able to factor in quarterbacks. And so, like, the uncertainty that comes from a quarterback injury, you can specify quarterback injury percentage and the downgrade that comes from that. Like, if you were to tell me that Patrick Mahomes is going to play all 17 regular season games, there's a lot less uncertainty in Kansas City's outcomes. But, the uncertainty for Kansas City largely comes from quarterback injury stuff. Whereas you saw San Francisco last year, they were able to survive. Their team was not as reliant on quarterback. So this is why I don't give elevator pitches, because I'm just, but
yeah, that's totally great. But it's not something where you're like selling picks. It's where you're saying, conditional on you wanting to enter this market, here are some best practices and some strategies we think that might help you be more informed about the decision.
Yeah.
You can have that one for free.
Thanks. Yeah. I'm a curious person, and I like kind of being able to be like, I have this idea. I wonder what the impact of this is. And so I can actually do that and see if I think this quarterback is fragile and this is a big downgrade. I run these simulations, it gives me this output. It syncs up with an odds screen and highlights where the value is for me based on the inputs I gave it.
Yeah. And super, super interesting. Kind of changes the way you think about approaching this. Because again, that's important as well, as if you are going to approach a market, or make a power rating or something, you need to understand the implications and what changes, and make sure you're doing that well. So certainly interesting. It's cool. It's cool to see what you guys have done with the tools and the simulator and everything. And again, I look at it for the college football lines just to kind of get a sense of where everyone is. And so great stuff over there. Really awesome to see some stuff you're building. And then I believe you guys have been doing a build your own model kind of series and some data science stuff on some education over there as well, which has been cool to see some of those articles. And again, just that kind of education angle. So yeah, check that out if you're listening and aren't familiar with Unabated. Certainly cool over there. Rufus, let's get to a couple of these questions. We've got some here that might take us a few minutes. So I want to hit some of them before we wrap up here. So Dylan Wilkerson says, what would be your advice for someone looking to take sports betting seriously? Where's a good place to start when beginning to build a model? What was your best win? We can tackle any or all of those that you want.
Okay, I would say, I mean, I can only really talk from my perspective, but I would say create a process for yourself. And I think there's certain skills you probably need to have, or find people that have those. I mean, I can't imagine doing this without some sort of coding skills or math skills. But I think I would try something and document your results. I think that's the best way to do things, because if as long as you document your results, you can't really lie to yourself, and you can continue to iterate, and it provides feedback. And whether that's like, I mean, I wouldn't bet something without having been able to to test it against previous lines. But even stuff I'm betting, I mean, I want to, obviously keeping really detailed records is really crucial to be able to grow. So I think there's a lot of different ways to approach sports betting, but the biggest thing I would say is to know if you have an edge is to be able to have records and detailed records. And even if you're a qualitative modeler, you can say, how confident was I on this? You might not be able to be making a line, but you're saying, I think the market is wrong on this because of this. You can then be able to quantify it. How good is your intuition? Even if you like, I like to say, like, quantifying qualitative things, like saying, what's my confidence level in this bet? And then you can kind of test how, maybe you're doing really well on your bets that you're really confident on, but but ones where you're only sort of confident on, you're not winning on. So you're betting too many things, so you can learn from just documenting with as much detail as you can. What was my best win? Let's see. I don't know. I mean, we had, I think the British Open in 2016, I believe, stands out as one of the big ones. We had a streak last year where we had a few really, really big ones. It was one of the golf majors though, but Masters in 2021 was really good. There's no one that just stands out as being like, this was the event, but
yeah. And some of that is, the fleeting dopamine cycle. There's times when you win and think, oh, I feel great. And then you don't remember it later because you have another win or a loss or whatever going on in the long run as well. So
you tend to remember the bad breaks a lot more.
Yeah, absolutely. Anna Jimenez asks, hey guys, I'm new to the show. There's a lot of language that's new to me. I was wondering if I wanted to start getting into this world of data and football, what book or X do you recommend I read to catch up on? One, I would say read some articles at SumerSports.com because there's some good language in there. Something like Hidden Game of Football or Mathletics are both really good entries into kind of thinking about data and football. Rufus, any entry points on the top of your mind?
I would say,
yeah.
Well, this isn't this is more on the betting side, but I would, on the betting side, required reading is The Logic of Sports Betting by Matthew David Au and Ed Miller.
That's a good one. I just got to that this year actually, and really appreciated it.
But I think your recommendations on football are quite good.
Let's see. We've got Ryan Nelson says Texas over Army in the College World Series is a great Rufus win.
Yeah.
So maybe your followers remember the wins a little bit better.
So this was the most improbable win. This was the College World Series in 2009. I don't think there's a lot of money on this, but we had bet on, I didn't even remember the teams involved. Texas was down 4 runs going into the 9th, and we'd bet them, like, this is the College World Series. There's teams of very different qualities. They were home. Texas was at home. We bet them minus 3.5 runs, and they were down by 4 going into the 9th inning. So they managed to tie the game, then load the bases, then hit a grand slam. Like, that had to be a 0.1% or less outcome going into that inning.
Yeah, that's wild. That's very fun. College baseball, very fun sport. I do a model for it every year and have just enjoyed the passion that it brings out. Everyone cares about their college baseball team for about 6 days at the beginning of June, and they are just furious about it. So, always fun. A couple more questions here that I don't know. I was just ask an interest. Do you either of you use tools from causal analysis in your own analyses? Obviously, both with an econ background. Rufus, any causal analysis in your predictions and your?
Remind me what causal analysis is first.
Yeah, it's basically econometrics, but they've rebranded it so the statisticians can do it as well. Stuff like difference in difference or regression discontinuity. Those are all going to be a little bit more academic methods and a lot more potentially descriptive and historic, not so much as future minded. So I don't think that in prediction, they're necessarily things that you're probably looking at. I
Oh, I
think
mean,
that's fair to say.
I use econometrics. The econometrics courses I took in college are the kind of the foundation of what got me into this.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I definitely use the, those. I use econometric methods all the time, but I don't know about regression discontinuities or whatever that is.
Yeah. I used a synthetic control and a difference in difference method on my dissertation and spent hours of my life doing it. So how.d, if you want to talk about that, hit me up in the DMs, because I don't think anyone wants to talk about that. But yeah, I mean, it's, I think more importantly, it's not specific set of tools. It's learning the tools that work the best for all of that. Yeah. Oh, please.
I'll follow up by saying I don't want to say I'm a machine learning skeptic. I think there's places for machine learning for sure. But if you have a theory, like, if you know something about something, use that knowledge. Don't count on the machine learning to say that a team that's winning by 7 should have a greater chance of winning than a team winning by 6. You need to put some constraints on it, because I've seen somebody build a model that had like a team winning by 6 with 40 seconds left having a greater chance of winning than a team up by 7. This is basketball. You can make not football, but, and so I think that there's, unsupervised machine learning can be dangerous. And I tend to believe even when you cross validate, you're going to get stuff that's still overfit. And so there's things we can do as humans, our thinking, our processes on things that the machine learning can't do. And so, I mean, I think it's very useful for some things, but I mean, I would say overall, like, you don't need the most complicated methods in the world. Most of what I do is regression based, but it's just about I think asking the right questions is more important than what sort of advanced method you use is.
Yeah, absolutely. The tools are just tools, and that's a great answer there. Cool. Well, here, looking at the clock here, we're starting to wrapping up or hitting that upper ceiling of time. So definitely want to respect that. Rufus, thank you so much for being here. People want to follow you, want to consume more of your content. Where can they find you?
You can find me on Twitter / I guess it's X now, at Rufus Peabody.
I'm never calling it that. I never remember. It's just changed on my phone, but it's got the X,
The problem is on my phone,
in my brain.
I look up the app, I try to type Twitter, and now it doesn't pop up. So
it's absurd. It would be very funny if he changed the name again in like a month and a half. But if it's not, yeah, just something different. Keep going through letters. But Rufus Peabody, thanks for joining the SumerSports show. I'm your host, Parker Fleming. We'll be back next week with some more fun content. Make sure you're liked and subscribed on the YouTube channel. Share the show with a football person, a numbers person you think might appreciate it. And make sure that you go over to SumerSports.com and sign up for our newsletter. That's getting rolling, and will be a lot of fun soon. Rufus, thanks so much for being here, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks so much, Parker. Really enjoyed it.